were involved in observing the recent Ukrainian elections. What conclusions have you reached?
Generally speaking, I would say that these elections were democratic, that a lot of efforts were invested and energy were invested to make those elections absolutely fair. However, the NGOs we are in contact with in Ukraine recorded quite a number of violations of the election law before the election day and also on the election day.
Would you say that would be enough to delegitimize the campaign, or is this in some sense manageable?
No, I would not say that that would delegitimize the campaign and the elections, but it means that more efforts have to be done and more improvements are also expected for the second round. We know that, again, there were cases of vote buying, that campaigners for various candidates didn't respect the election law, and even some took pictures of their votes and showed that on the internet, which is a criminal case, in fact, that could lead to a prison sentence of up to 3 years. But these are events that must absolutely be rejected, incidents that must be rejected. But it shows that anyway, there have been many improvements in comparison with other previous elections. And we think that the authorities will take those incidents into consideration and make sure that the next round will be more democratic and more acceptable and not just decent, as the EU envoy said this morning.
We hear about a completely unknown candidate here. He's a comedian. Is that a joke, or is that democracy in action?
Of course, it is a democratic election. Everybody can compete and register to become the president of Ukraine or any other country. But what is really surprising is that he got 30% of the votes. Of course, there are several reasons for that. He's an anti-system candidate, and he could gather a lot of populist votes. People were really fed up with all the former presidents, and I would even say the parliaments, because they were totally corrupted, and they did not reflect the aspirations of the people who want to have a decent life, to have economic growth, old people who want to have good retirement pensions, young people who want to get a job, to be able to study at the university. And although there were a lot of positive steps that were taken by President Poroshenko, he didn't do a lot, and it's really very diplomatic when I say that, to fight against corruption, for example, and to clean up the judiciary, where a lot of judges are still in favor of the president that was before Poroshenko.
What would you expect of the EU? We're here in Brussels having this discussion, but what can the EU do to shore up and help that fight against corruption and ensure that elections are fair and free?
Yes, the EU, of course, cannot interfere in the electoral process, that's for sure. Any candidate that will win the elections, if they are recognized as fair and democratic, will be recognized as such by the EU. EU should certainly go on helping the next leaders of Ukraine, and in a couple of months there will also be parliamentary elections, to abide by the EU standards in all the areas, including in the human rights field, where I must say a lot of progress has been achieved in the last 10 years. And when you compare the human rights situation in Russia and in Ukraine, there is absolutely no comparison at all. And we see that in Crimea, that is now under Russian occupation. So the EU should go on helping Ukraine, whatever the parliament, whatever the new president, on its course of looking towards Brussels.